and thanks for being here. Kimmy Yam and myself, who are colleagues over at 30 Rock. It's great to see you. Kimmy Yam is here for NBCU Academy. My name is Richard Lui. I'm an anchor over at MSNBC and NBC News. Welcome to NBCU Academy, as it does many great things. And today we get to highlight AAPI Heritage Month, APA Heritage Month, AAPIHM, whatever you want to call it. And we're finishing it up. We're going to chat with Kimmy Yam, the amazing reporter and journalist for NBC News. She has many beats. One of her main beats is over at NBC Asian America, which is the vertical on NBCnews.com that covers the AAPI community. And Kimmy, you have been busy. Busy. Tell us about what you've been up to. Yeah, tell us about your work.
Oh man, there's no rest, right? But that's just news. This past, year plus, it's been a lot, because on top of the pandemic, we've also had an election. And then on top of that, we've also had, the anxiety and stress and fear that comes from a lot of the attacks on Asian Americans. And just, this overall new call, I think it's a very reinvigorated call for more representation and visibility from the Asian American community. And so it's been, there isn't any rest, but it's for good reasons. I think that right now we're at a time in history where the community is demanding more and demanding better, and the journalism has to be better and has to expand beyond a lot of these very basic narratives that we've seen throughout the years. And especially since most of the reporting on Asian America has been crowded in, entertainment and representation on screen. I think we've moved well beyond that, and to talk about issues that really impact all different groups within our giant, very diverse community. I think that's the next step, and that's what we're pushing for.
Now, one of the big, huge things that you've done over at NBC News, NBC Asian America, is to really dig into the complexities and the layers of the community, but in a way that's very digestible and clearly very intelligent and very well articulated. In the last year, what have you learned? I mean, already being an experienced journalist, but as we live through this time where we are all, us AAPI folks that happen to be journalists, in a way have had to become stronger civil rights reporters in many ways, and amongst many other obligations. How's that changed for you, and what you've learned, and the tool sets that you've brought in to get that out in the last year since we've been experiencing this anti-Asian hate?
That's a great question. I think both you and I have been in this space and in reporting on Asian Americans and on that community before Crazy Rich Asians, and before I think America was really paying attention to it. So I think that we kind of laid down that foundation of, what sensitivities out there, what communities to really reach out to and envelop ourselves in, and the different groups and activists and these people who really, really make our community. One of the biggest lessons that I've learned over the past year is that the social conversation around Asian America is not, it's important to not conflate that with what's going on the ground. I think, right now, a lot of journalists are making that mistake of deferring to celebrities or people with a lot of clout and money to speak out about these issues and give their perspective, when truthfully, a lot of their perspective is extremely, they don't have that proximity to a lot of the communities that are being directly affected. Actors who are making millions of dollars don't actually, have much in common with people who live in low income, high crime communities. So I think a lot of this past year was putting blinders on and going straight to those communities, straight to those people, and straight to those experts to really find out what's going on the ground, not relying on influencers, celebrities, or people who are really bubbling up during this time, but relying on the facts and relying on what is actually happening. And I think that a mistake that people often make is, getting their perspective from people who are very, they're sexy in the community right now. People want to hear from them and they're cool, whether it be these actors or musicians or things like that. But it's important to go into these communities and talk to the people and look for, see for yourself what is going on. People who have lived there for decades and decades, and not just rely really lazily on, on these up and comers who, I think that we all have a voice and we all have a perspective, but we have to be conscious of who's in actual authority on these issues.
So well said. So well said. And obviously, in the years that you and I have known each other, you've been a journalist that is focused on the fundamentals, right? And you're reminding us right now, don't forget the fundamentals. Don't get dazzled, right? By, as you were saying, those who might be in the limelight typically, and to get all of our meals, right? When it comes to getting fed. Well, another thing I wanted to ask you about that very topic, what is it that inspires you, Kimmy, to say straight and narrow, like, I'm a journalist, this is the way I need to talk about it? Because in these spaces, so we can sometimes get dazzled by the energy of the day, right? What might be happening. But you've always stayed straight and narrow. What inspires you to do that?
One thing that is a little bit different for me, and I'm a real lateral moves kind of girl. I love just writing. I love writing. I don't want clout. I don't want to be famous. I don't want my face out there or anything. I just like writing. And so when that's kind of your goal, and your only goal in life is to get better at reporting, finding out the truth, and honing that skill, there's nothing interesting to me about fame or interesting to me about these spaces that a lot of people are so attracted to. Richard, I have to tell this story. I know your book is literally entitled Enough About Me, but I do want to talk about you. way back when I was, I want to say I was a junior in college, and I had spent the summer interning at Dateline. Very different type of journalism than I'm doing now. But I remember seeing your face around, and I thought it was crazy that an Asian person was an anchor. I was like, damn, we made it. And then I'm a secret Richard Lui historian. I actually know absolutely everything about you. And so I remember reading that you didn't go into small markets first to move up. You had a whole career in a corporate world in the private sector. And then you moved into journalism. And I was so curious about that. So I had some balls at that time. I just cold emailed you and I was like, let's talk. And then we really did meet up and chatted, and I was like, oh, wow, it's really possible. So I went back to school my senior year. I was about to graduate and I was like, I don't know what to do. I feel like I want to go into broadcast. I don't know. And so I reached out to you, and even though you didn't remember me, you were like, yeah, let's get on the phone. And I was shocked. It was like, what? That I was shocked that someone was so willing to talk to just a random ass senior in college. I was really, really just moved by that. But I remember you saying, don't look at broadcast if you want to be a really good reporter, and if that is your goal in life, you go into digital and you go into print and you learn how to hone those skills first. And so it's your fault that I never want my face on TV, because I fell in love so much with that art of writing. Yeah. That is ultimately, I just want to get better and better and better at it. And so, I think it really takes someone to encourage, us to go into the field, and be someone to show you how to do it right, and to show you okay, the true meaning of journalism is finding truth. It's it's learning about the true fabric and depth of our community. It's not having your face out there. It's not getting clout. It's none of that. It's truly just what does our community look like, and what do we truly deserve? And that was so important for me to hear.
Yeah, and those conversations are really key, and you're having that also as people reach out to you now and saying, Kimmy, what do I do? What's the right journey? What's the right decision? And the one thing that and I knew that in our conversations, and we had conversations after that, that there's one thing that you were always very clear about was exactly what you just said, which is I need to be a good journalist. I need to get it right. And I love my craft. And if those of you who have read any of her stuff, including just within the last 24 hours, you'll see that love of her craft because it comes out in every letter, in every space, in every punctuation point. And boy, I mean, you remind me a lot of another leader in our community, which is Sue Van, who says, I'm out there to get it right. I don't want to be powerful or famous. I just know I have work to do, and my job is this. And it's great to see that humble, if you will, approach to getting it right. What brought you to these values? And then we'll get back into what you've written recently. But who in your sphere is it your parents, friends, siblings? Where do you get this value from?
Yeah, it's interesting seeing where we are today, and I feel like you have a similar working class background as well. Since I am a Richard Lui historian, I know all about that. But I back in the day, I used to think, I come from a restaurant family. My whole family, they're all restaurant workers. My cousin's family, my cousin's cousins, we come from an area of China, which, a lot of the immigrants from there are very discriminated against, even within the Chinese American community. And we're all very working class. A lot of your nail techs are from Fujian. A lot of your restaurant workers that you see in New York City are from Fujian. And that's my family. And for a long time, I think that I was very confused about, we talk about the model minority myth, and that's not at all what I was dealing with when I was younger. I remember going to a ballet class, and someone in the class had ordered food, and it didn't come, I think that it didn't come with utensils or something like that, and they just looked at me like, hey, where's my stuff? As if I will always, in every single setting, be of service to you, that's
Wow.
how people looked at us. I remember my dad picking me up from school in his, fast food uniform. I'd be so embarrassed because he smells like, the grease from the wok, and people just shouting menu items at us all the time. And so it was such a weird, painful experience. But I on screen, you see a lot of this model minority, and I was like, I don't really understand that, because we just didn't get that. Even, just going to college, I always thought that was going to be my biggest achievement, was just going to a college, because my parents hadn't had that. And so now that I have a platform, it's something that I used to be so embarrassed about, but now I understand that coming from a very working class background, that is an entire half of Asian America that was never spoken about, but it makes me so much better of a reporter, because I understand the communities and areas and neighborhoods that all these people live in. And I think that there's a lot of value to having that sensitivity, and bringing those stories to the fore, because if not us, then who, and I think I think a lot of us grow up because there's not a lot of us out there, and there's not a lot of information out there. We grow up with this shame, not knowing that it is this type of superpower, because you'll see there's other outlets who will try to cover the same things, and they cannot do it with depth, and they don't do it responsibly, and they also do it incredibly inaccurately, and through a very National Geographic lens, where they're like, wow, look at these exotic human beings, they're nothing like us. But we're able to break it down and digest it a little bit, because we come from these areas. And so when people are like, oh my god, identity politics, or they say that with such this tinge of disdain, but truly having that background and being able to talk about race, I think that is so key and so important, and that's brought me to where I am today. Without it, I think that I would be a much less accurate and responsible reporter.
Interesting. So it's a lot of personal passion along with the craft, and it's really led to your excellence in the craft. It really driven you down that road, and so the flip side then, Kimmy, for a moment, you may have heard this in your career, but I've been asked many a time, Richard, how about why don't you take on the beat of the Asian folk? That's your beat. Why don't you take that beat? Now, here you are as a specialist. You can be on any beat you want, Kimmy. You've decided that you're going to show your excellence at NBC News through NBC Asian America, which is an amazing vertical. And the quality that you and the team put out and is just fantastic. I mean, it beats all the other ones. I love all the other ones because we need more. But
Right.
I'm a bigger lover of what you and Jesse do over there and your entire team. But is that what you want to be? Like, isn't that on the flip side? Because I'm Asian, that needs to be my beat. Isn't that kind of and sometimes a slap in our face because that's all we can do as a journalist is cover our own ethnicity?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think that there's a difference between being siloed into that topic versus actually choosing that topic and doing it in a way that's very deeply reported. And that's a great thing to bring up because a lot of newsrooms do make this mistake where they see someone of color, and because we're so rare in newsrooms, they're like, okay, you are on this beat forever. Right. And in those newsrooms, there's generally a very kind of very base level understanding of what Asian America looks like. Oftentimes, and I noticed this, in other newsrooms I've been in, their idea of Asian American and covering Asian America is let's talk about, this person or this news story that happens to have an Asian person in it versus let's talk about this issue that's disproportionately affecting the Asian American community in a bigger way. And how does it relate to the world at large? And it's such a huge, you can tell in the way that they publish a lot of these pieces and the way that the headlines look, the information in the interviews in them, that they're not doing much to move the community forward, but they're just checking off boxes, right? Because diversity is a hot thing, but no one talks about why we need it. I think for me, it's like I really voluntarily went into this because I felt that there was this giant gap between this world that we exist and revolve around and the world that my parents came up in, and the world that very gritty, very real world that a lot and most Asian Americans are dealing with. And so that was kind of, my very voluntary mission. And then also just making sure that people understand there's a wealth of topics, of information. I think that there's an idea that Asian America is very niche, and that it affects so few people. And that's why, it feels very limiting in some spaces, but if you do it right, there are so many things to cover. And honestly, I feel like there's too many. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I can't sleep. But I think if you do all these things right and it's from the community, for those people, then you'll show that there's a lot of depth there. But if it really is just a very superficial thing, checking off boxes and siloing people into those spaces, that is wrong, and that's racist.
Yeah, it ain't good, as they say. But as I know you feel, we both feel very honored to be able to cover the community. May not always get it right, but I always feel very honored to be able to even discuss our stories because they are American stories, as you know. Kimmy, and by the way, please stop me. I'm just going down my little curious road and really wanting to dig into the Kimmy brain. Is what would your tips be to those who are in college or just out of college about how to get a job, how to think about journalism? Let's start with those two.
Okay. It's going to be a lot of what you already told me. And that's just, first off, I think that because of the way that a lot of Asian America is coming up right now, I think that there's an emphasis, and it has a lot to do with this reaction to this lack of representation and the way in which we've been perceived in the past as like super nerdy, like unworthy of being on screen like that. I think a lot of Asian America is focused on getting famous and coming up in a way that, makes them seem cool. But at the end of the day, if you want to be a good journalist, it's not about being cool. It's about doing the actual work, looking at your sentences. Are they beautiful? Does it, like, when you look at your piece, it should feel like a gorgeous, like, gradient. That's how I try to think about things, where each paragraph melts into the other. It shouldn't be a staccato, disgusting thing that it's like, oh, this is like eating my vegetables. I have to read this. It should be like that. And so when people think about a career in journalism, I think too often it's like, okay, how do I get on screen? How do I make myself an influence? How do I get clout? But at the end of the day, it really is about how well you do your craft. And then another thing too is just with journalism, you can be working all the time. You can always be freelancing. You can always be pitching, and you can always be writing. And when you feel that, maybe it's really difficult to get a staff position, especially when you're first starting out, but that's no excuse to stop writing. You have to keep writing. And I think that a lot of people look at themselves and they're like, oh, I'm Asian American, so that makes me qualified to write about Asian Americans. That's also untrue. You have to be doing the work because we don't know everything about the community. Just being Asian American, there's a lot of blind spots. And so you have to go out there and talk about it and talk to people and do the reading, do a crap ton of reading. And you might not want to spend those, Saturday nights in while everyone's like having fun. But sometimes you need to be studying and studying and studying. I remember when I first started out, if I had like a really good piece and if my editor was like, oh, this was like beautiful, this did such a great job, I would study the structure. I'd be like, what worked about this? Why did this work? And it would be hours of that. I started out at HuffPost, and at the time it was a fellow program. It was $10 an hour. And it's just like the crappiest, it's barely livable in New York City, but it was like, I wanted it so bad. I would just sit there hours and hours every single night, pull up so many different articles and see like, why was this effective? What about this headline worked? And that pays off because at the end, you really do realize like the learning curve is pretty steep and you can really get better. But unless you're doing that, you're going to be a very average journalist who doesn't actually move the community forward. And so, like you told me all those years ago, it's about just like being humble and going forward to do what the craft is about, not what you think it will bring you.
Yeah, I love your comment about just because I'm Asian doesn't mean I'll be a good Asian good reporter on Asian America, and I went through that myself when I was at CNN, and we had Virginia Tech happened, and the gunman happened to be of Asian descent. And then I realized what I didn't know. And that kind of began this long journey of what does it mean to be Asian American? What do the 50 communities represent to us, right? What are the languages? Right. What do the different regionalities mean? And that was, whoa, I'm still learning tons, but that was the beginning of, I'm going to talk about this because I happen to be the only Asian American Pacific Islander in the newsroom. Then I got to own this. And that began this sort of, like you said, this long journey of just doing tons of community events for now over a decade to try to understand, because in our community keeps on changing and evolving. It's really a vibrant thing. And that is, I think, the takeaway as a journalist. Just because we happen to be male or female, for instance, can I write on all male issues? Can I write on all female issues? Can we write on gender just because we identify as a certain gender? No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. You got to do the work. That is 101, as you're reminding us, Kimmy. So Kimmy, for those who want to know, because you just beautifully talked about how you see the craft, tell us how, and we only got maybe a handful of minutes here, but help them out as they're beginning their journey. What is Kimmy's approach to putting together that beautiful fabric of a story that you just described? How do you approach it?
I think that one thing that I do a lot, which is probably like my editors probably hate it, but it's helped a lot, is that I often over-report. I will talk to so many sources when I'm putting together a story, because you need to be sure, and you need to make sure there's no blind spots, and when that story goes out, everything is accounted for. I'm not going to be caught slipping. I'm sorry. I'm never going to make a mistake like that. So I will do the work. But then also, one thing that's been really important to me was, as a lifelong fan of just literature and fiction, I think I always had this habit of reading one. Okay, so I usually read 2 books at a time, and I write one to learn, or I read one to learn information, and I read the other to learn how to write. So in doing that, I think it's helped absorb a lot of information, but also remind myself that things that I come out with are not going to, like, they don't have to feel like line by line a collection of facts. You're supposed to move through a piece like it's artwork, because journalism is an art form. It's not a, it's not like a rote skill, it's an art. And so in order to get people to understand things, in order to get people to appreciate information, humanize a people, it is so much more than just spitting out facts. I remember, one writer that I admire who is a real weirdo is E.L. Doctorow. And he is really into melding, fantasy with history. That's not what I do in my pieces, by the way. It's all factual. But I remember going into a talk with Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he was talking about how, it was through Doctorow and the way that he writes that he was able to understand that journalism and reporting in itself should be beautiful. It shouldn't be something that you loathe to read, and that really stuck with me. And so, from then on, every single week I try to be reading 2 books. And wow. I think that, we think that when we're reporting and when we're writing, we're constantly reading and we're constantly researching. And we see that. I think a lot of times we get confused and think that counts as reading. It really doesn't. It doesn't necessarily help your prose. So I think that to go out and make sure you continue to learn and continue to read outside of what your work is, that is so important. We should never stop working. Or reading. We shouldn't get complacent that our skills are good enough, because, in a very Asian way, I want to say that we'll never be good enough. So, we have to just keep pushing, because honestly, the community deserves more. The community deserves to be explored in a way that's lovely and gorgeous and what it actually is, and in the past it hasn't been. So we're just trying to start that new story and make sure that we really delve into it in a way where people can see it as beautiful as we do.
Boy, if that doesn't make people hungry to read your work, if that doesn't make people hungry to go to NBC Asian America, it doesn't make people hungry just to want to become a journalist, I don't know what will. Kimmy, this was 100 pounds of sand in a 10-pound sack, but people can feel it when they see your stuff and when you talk. So thank you so much on behalf of NBCU Academy for being so open and for really giving so much in this talk about the way you see journalism and the way you see the Asian American Pacific Islander community. There's so much more, and we'll get to that in another conversation, I hope, very soon. But for now, thank you, Kimmy. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for inspiring me all those years ago. It's so funny we're having this conversation now during Heritage Month, because that was my start. Literally, that conversation on the phone with this random kid. You had no idea who you were talking to, but you were like, let me give her some advice. No. And here we are.
Don't blame it on me. You did this all by yourself, and you've done just amazing stuff. And that's great that we get to share a little bit of your best tips and your understanding of what journalism and a career in journalism might mean. Kimmy Yam, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being with us. Have a great day.